All right, can you state your name and your occupation?
Nicolette Bethel, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the College of Bahamas.
All right, I want to know, first start off with your childhood teen years. What were you like?
Short. I don't know, I mean, I wasn't looking at myself. So I used to read a lot. I used to write a lot. I wanted to be a writer of novels and stories and things like that. And, yeah. So that's basically it. Would be the main things. I was also fairly active in school, doing a number of different things. But in my head, I was reading a lot and writing a lot.
Okay, I know your parents were prominent activists when it came down to being in culture and arts, so can you tell me a little bit about them?
Yeah. Well, my mother was an education. She was a career educator. She started off teaching French and Spanish, and then became an educational administrator, deputy head at government high school, then various titles at the College of Bahamas, ending with principal, and then moving to president. So she was involved in the arts in a more of a hobby kind of way. She was a trained singer and very musical, and that was her primary involvement in the arts as a singer in a choir, my father's choir. My father was a musician, he was a pianist, he was again classically trained, he became director of culture, he was very much into all of the arts. My father also was a very good writer and an artist as well as a musician. He was focused on music, but he appreciated all of the arts. So we were very much exposed to different elements of the arts in my house.
Okay, growing up, how did their careers impacted you?
Well, they were both very well respected in their fields and very well loved. And I think that the thing that they did most for me and my brother was to show us how to be able to inspire people when you're a leader without bullying them, without forcing them to do things, how to get people to want to achieve more. Both of them were very good at that in their different ways. So that was probably the most inspirational to me.
All right, on to your college years. What schools did you attend, and how did it like leaving home for quite some time?
I went to many schools. I left first when I was 16 to go to a United World College, which is not a university, but it is sort of like grades 11 and 12. Back in the olden days, they used to have A levels, so it would be the equivalent of A levels. We did the International Baccalaureate, which is a 2-year course. So I left at 16 and I went to a United World College in Canada. It was very exciting because it was competitive. I had to earn a scholarship. It was isolated. It was a little microcosm of a society unto itself. It had a whole sort of, lofty visions and goals, and it was all very exciting. So I enjoyed leaving home at that time. And I went off to University of Toronto, but I took a year off and stayed and came back home and worked for a year. Then I went to University of Toronto for 4 years. At that time, I didn't really have a choice. The College of the Bahamas had very limited offerings. It was primarily the professions, and I wasn't interested in any of them. I wanted to study English literature, and I wanted to get bachelor's in English literature, and that was not an option at the College of the Bahamas in 1982. So I went to University of Toronto. Then I came back home and I worked again, and then I went to the University of Cambridge and I studied social anthropology. So in all of those cases, leaving home was a prerequisite to getting a university education.
Was there any particular reason why the College of the Bahamas you couldn't teach English there, or is there any particular
Well, I
reason?
could teach, but I couldn't study it. I had to go get my degree first.
Oh, that's what you meant.
Yeah.
So, is there any particular reasons for the majors that you chose over the past years?
Yeah, but they wouldn't necessarily be the reasons you would expect. The first one was I wanted to be a writer, so if you want to be a writer, you study literature. So that was the reason why I took English literature. And then the reason why I took social anthropology was that they were offering a scholarship in a subject, history or history related.
Ah.
And I thought there were enough historians writing on written history in the Bahamas. This is kind of at the very beginning of the whole idea of social history, and looking at things other than documents to come up with a historical study. So I thought if I did history, it would be difficult because there were already historians working with social artifacts and working with documents, and I thought to myself, there's a lot more history in the Bahamas that isn't written down. So how do I study that? And I thought, well, anthropologists have techniques that can study living human beings on the ground, or ways of doing it. So that's why I chose anthropology.
All right. Knowing that you've been in school for quite some time, when it came down to getting your bachelor's and, of course, your PhD, is there something that you learned outside of school, something that you couldn't have learned there?
Well, University of Toronto, I was in a big city for 4 years. Toronto is a nice, it was called Toronto the Good. It was a good city to be a young woman in because it was safe. I was in the heart of the city, and I could be walking home from school. I would have evening classes, and I could be on the bus, or waiting for the bus, or walking home at 11 in the night, and I never felt threatened, which is not common. It's not normal, and I don't even know if it would be the case today. And it was a big city, like, over a million. It's not a big city by worldwide standards, but certainly by Bahamian standards, it was a big
Pretty
city.
big.
So I got exposed to the urban life, and also Nassau, when I was growing up, was not urban in the way that it is today. It was a town. So I got exposed to urban life. I got to go to the ballet. I got to go to concerts. I got to go art. The things that were not available in Nassau at the time. Museums, art galleries, lectures, being exposed to all kinds of things. So being in Toronto was great. I got city living. I got a sense of independence. And all without being threatened. And then in Cambridge, it was more of an academic thing. It was, yeah. I had the library. I had the access to lectures by all these world-renowned intellectuals. So again, and then a wide variety of the arts and bookstores galore. So those were the things that I got in those places that I didn't get here.
I know that you just recently were talking about the Bahamas not having that much opportunities back then. Is there any particular reason why you came back? I know a lot of Bahamian students tend not to come back as a result of scarce opportunities. So what made you come back?
Well, scarce opportunities is really a fairly new thing in the Bahamas. It's 21st century phenomenon. It wasn't the case in the 20th century. And there were lots of opportunities, and you wanted to come back to create more. You wanted to come back to help to contribute to this development of the society and so on. The society has got a lot less elastic, and we're still trying to run the country on mid-20th century visions and goals, and that's part of the problem. We haven't developed the sectors that young people are interested in coming back to be involved in. When I was coming home, it was easy to find a job. Especially if you had a university education. Most people, if you put it into context, I came out of university in 1986, and public education had only been made available to all Bahamians starting in 1968. So that meant that having a bachelor's degree, having an associate's degree was a big deal. Having a bachelor's degree was gold. It pretty well guaranteed you a job. So, and then I got a PhD fairly early, again. So again, having a PhD was that's a different situation. You don't get as many rewards for having a PhD as you do for having a BA and a master's. Especially if you go to government, gave me no advantage in government at all.
Yeah, I noticed that. What about after a few years, I noticed that you've become the director, or you were the director of culture. Can you explain the highs and lows of that position?
The highs and lows of that position. Well, the highs. I was exposed to, it gave me, working for government is something that many people should do, that most people should do. If they could get a government job, you should get it. Because it gives you an understanding of how the country runs, of the impediments to development. It gives you a networking. It gives you a public platform of a kind that you don't have in other places. But it's not something that you want to do for a very long time. It's a really good stepping stone to moving on, but it's not. Government is so very unproductive at the moment. So the highs were all of the things I mentioned, plus the big high was I got to travel and I got to talk about and put on the table and on an agenda basic things, basic cultural realities, and got to introduce new concepts, I think, to the political and civil servant classes that I think are now coming into normalcy 10 years later. But the lows were, you can't get anything radical or real or necessary done in government. The government is designed very much to administer a colony, and we have never adjusted that. So it's virtually impossible to get anything new, radical. It's not a very responsive institution. It is very, very conservative in the sense that it conserves the colonial structures of the mid-20th century.
So have not changed that. Now, on to your written work. I've noticed that a lot of your blog and your articles and poems and books, they tend to have themes such as religion, classism, and they tend to talk about race and Bahamian or national identity. Why are these themes important to you?
I guess religion is a very personal thing for me. We are a very religious society, but also pretty intolerant and pretty inflexible when it comes to manifestations of belief. And we're very public about them. We have been very public about the manifestations of belief, and so we have these very strong norms which people assume that you fit into if you believe. And I don't always fit into the norms in my belief. So religion is a personal part of my life that comes up mostly in my poems, I think.
Mm-hmm.
As the other things, I think we still live in a very unjust, I keep referring to the administration of equality. We have perpetuated injustices over time as a nation. We have perpetuated inequalities. We have not lived up to the promise of majority rule. We have not lived up to the promise of independence. And I think that these things have to be talked about and these things have to be said, because many people are suffering from the effects of our having failed in those areas, and nobody's really talking about them. We're not talking about issues, we're talking about personalities. And I think that is not going to get us anywhere at all.
I've also noticed that you've started a wonderful play program. It's called SIP. Can you tell me what's the motivation behind Shakespeare in Paradise?
Sure. The motivation behind Shakespeare in Paradise has a number of different things, but it was in direct reaction to the idea that the Bahamas couldn't host an international festival, and we canceled Carafesta twice. And I wanted to show that we could. So Shakespeare in Paradise is an international theatre festival that is independent of government. It is self-sustaining, and we tried to develop a model where we put on a festival every year, and it is international. We have a number of different goals. One of them is to produce classical theatre in the Bahamas so that people get exposed to classical theatre. One of it is to give people the opportunity to expand their experience, if they're performers, their experience. We want to develop a demand for live theatre in the country, so we're training audiences, because we feel that if there's more of a demand for live theatre, there's more of a chance for people to be able to make a living in it. It's not possible. It doesn't exist right now. And Yeah, and we also want to create something that will be a tourist attraction in the long run. People come to the Bahamas not just for Atlantis, but to see theater.
Wow. Where do you see Straight Touring Paradise in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, 5 to 10 years, it's going to be just getting itself off the ground. I would prefer to be thinking 30 to 50 years around that. It was inspired by a festival that we used to go to when we were teaching. My husband and I were teaching on the west coast of Canada, called the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which started off in 1935 as one Shakespeare play a year. It was called a Shakespeare Festival, but it was really one Shakespeare play a year that took place in the summer, produced by the university. And it has grown into a 10-month cycle of plays, and it basically runs the economy of this small town in Oregon called Ashland. And we thought, if they can do it in Ashland, why can't we do it in Nassau? So 5 to 10 years, we'll still be growing. In 10 years' time, maybe we will have expanded beyond the 2-weekend model that we have now into maybe a month. I'd like to see it get longer. I'd like us to be able to feature more shows. Of course, we need more theaters. We need more performers. So 5 to 10 years is a really short period of time. In 5 years, I hope we've got our model that we've developed working really well, and we'll be able to begin expanding it. In 10 years, maybe it'll be a little bit longer, 3 weekends. But I want to think about what's it going to be like in 70 years' time. I want it to be all year round in 70 years' time. I want it to be a major part of the Nassau economy in 70 years' time.
All right, you gave a lot of insight on your resolve, motivation, and inspiration. Can you tell me some of your greatest accomplishments to this day?
Staying alive in government. I guess by earning my PhD, being director of co-chair, starting Shakespeare in Paradise. Let's go with those.
So, is your life fulfilled? Is there more left to go? Are there
there's
any
more
new
I could
plans?
do, but if I were to die tomorrow, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't feel like I wasted my life. But there's a lot more to do.
It's a lot more. All right, thank you, Dr. Nicolette Bethel.
Thank you, Ms. Sherelle Fox.